Hello, Snore Nerd, and I wanted to talk today about something I did actually cover a few years ago in another video. That was mental health and being a developer. I wanted to approach this with having had distance of a few more years to think, reflect, and just try and accurately represent my experience of suffering, in my case, with bipolar disorder and working in the IT industry slash developer, being a developer, being a programmer. So, start with the definition, I suppose. So, bipolar disorder is a mood condition which frequently manifests of varying extremes of mood, whether they be low or high. So, low is probably recognizable for most people as depression. So a lack of energy is the marking feature of depression, and mania is the high, as it were, is the opposite of that. It's an excess of energy, lack of sleep, flight of ideas, flighty ideas, and yeah, it's like the opposite of depression, basically. I've had this condition since I was 17 years old. I certainly feel that in some ways I do have a bit of a chip on my shoulder with regards to the stigma that still exists around this condition. And I probably wanted to talk a bit today about the huge effort of will it takes to actually hide it all the time, which is almost as hard to manage as the condition itself, to be honest. Specifically, obviously, if you're working in a high stress environment as well, like being a developer, which can be high stress at times, this can become quite difficult to manage at times. And I have my own experience of that, to be honest. So I guess the most obvious thing that the developer community would associate with mental health issues, which are quite prevalent, especially anxiety and depression, mood disorders in general, and anxiety-related conditions. Amongst developers, there is a lot of that prevalent. There's a lot of that prevalent. Burnout is the word though for what most people would associated specifically with coding and programming is coder burnout, where you go. Usually, it's precipitated by an extremely intense period of work, either commercially or just self work, self-directed work, and then you basically reach a point where you just burn out on a project from pushing it beyond the pale of what is just normal, and not normal per se, it's the wrong word, but more like what is probably advisable. A lot more developers talk about this situation now, and you can recover from burnout. Like, I've burnt out easily myself about twice, once pretty badly, and to be honest, from the last burnout, I'm still in a way recovering from it. I'm still programming a lot, but my enthusiasm actually does jump around a lot for programming, which is probably tied in specifically with my mood shifts, I guess. So my actual productivity levels in terms of coding are sporadic. Most of the patterns in my life, if you want to measure them in some way, are sporadic. This means that it can become harder to fit into a conventional world. I found so most workplaces, even if you're doing remote work, you have to be available from 9 to 5. This has sometimes been a bit of an issue for me because I tend to get more inspired in terms of programming, creative work, anything like that in the evening. In all honesty, so I'm a proper night owl. Now, this is an individual pattern that's unique to me. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody will have that same. With bipolar, it's not specifically a feature of bipolar, but staying up late and being enthusiastic about, getting a sudden burst of inspiration about a certain idea is definitely a feature of bipolar. The hypermania side of it, basically. In terms of my own programming work, like I've released projects, I've done stuff, I'm constantly learning. It can mean a bit of a difficulty with attention and focus. I have an almost ADHD nature in a lot of ways, that I can. Sometimes I can hyperfocus. It's strange. Sometimes I can hyperfocus, and I'm really, really in a zone for like 5 hours. It's intense work. I bet and it feels inspirational. It's like that natural flow. But then other times I get really stuck. Now that happens to any programmer, regardless of if you have a mood or anxiety related condition, right? But the thing is, it really does start to affect. In some respects, if I start getting that dreaded block and it feels like a block of concrete falls down. Like when I'm in the zone, I feel like I'm connecting dots and I'm seeing a big picture, and I'm putting all the pieces together, and it feels fast, and it feels fluid, and it feels intuitive, and it's actually a joyful state, right? Like this sort of flow state of creativity where I'm really on it, and like even sometimes it could even be prototypal code you're writing, in the sense of this isn't even like the finished article, but just the process of writing it is creating joy, basically, which is the best state of programming. That's why I probably still keep doing it, right? It's creative state. It's actually a creative process. Something I think people often misunderstand with programming is that it's a creative flow state. Yes, there is logic. Yes, there is maths involved. Yes, there is system building. But all of those processes, which are essentially engineering and design processes, but they are still creative processes. You are learning and applying existing knowledge sets to a completely brand new thing. You're making something out of nothing, right? And that's quite an addictive thing for sure. To be, if you're a creative and creatively minded person, then you buzz off that. Obviously, novelty is something you will search for in any work you do, really. But there is a downside to this, of course. So I do take medication for my mood disorder, just to keep me fairly stable, not too numb, but sort of like on an even keel, as it were. I have gone off medication before, like I've done that before. It's generally speaking not a very good idea, because it could take a month, it could take 2 months, but I just start losing track of things. But even on medication, to be honest, like I do have memory fog. That's one of the main annoying things. Is related to depression. Is memory fog's a state where you just have lapses, basically, and space out. That happens to me quite frequently. I'll maybe, prior to like being very involved and doing something quite intense, mentally draining, like programming when it's at the high end of it, right? I will get this sort of like period of just being spaced out. Is the best way. I always used to describe this to my mum. Actually, it's just I'm spaced out. I'm spaced out. I can't. I could stare for. You lose sense of time often as well. So, especially with depression. Now, this is hard for anyone, I think, to understand who's never really experienced clinical depression. But anyone with any experience of depression will tell you the same thing. It can feel like you lose sense of time, really, in a way. It just everything feels meaningless. And often in programming, if you're not focused and working on something which gives you meaning or gives you a sense of purpose, that can definitely lead to burnout as well, like, which can then lead to depression and anxiety and associated states of mind, basically. So if you don't, this is why actually I think it is quite important. I've talked about this before. If you value align with whatever project you're working on, I think that's actually quite an important. Um, it's quite an important value to hold dear, that you value align with whatever app or service you're working on. Now, obviously, like if you're working at, there are different types of tech businesses. You've got like software as a service, you've got creative agencies, you've got startups, and you've got big tech, and you've got fintech or like big financial institutions, all sorts of areas, or like even games as well, like more creative based development. So all of these individual workspaces, if you will, have different benefits and drawbacks. I'm only going to talk now about specifically about my experience from working in industry for over a decade now in various developer roles, mostly front end and full stack based roles on and off. So I'll start with I'll do like a pros and cons list, basically just based on my own experience. Startups, because this is often where people will find their first breaks, but it's often where the most, in a lot of ways, like it can be, it's a very dynamic environment, a startup, but expect to be put under a lot of pressure. Expect to be pushed potentially to your limits and above beyond. Like startups often, well, depending on the startup, but most startups you're expected to wear a lot of hats. If you're junior and you've sort of got the energy for that, then that's obviously, it's a good way to learn and share your knowledge and learn from other developers, obviously. But it does come with a price, and that price is burnout's probably going to happen more frequently, I'd say, and sort of definitely like low starting off startups. And I think in a startup, it's definitely even more important that your values align in terms of what the startup is actually trying to deliver, what value it's trying to deliver to the world. Whether that just be purely on a business level or just something they're trying to aim to do, like they have a mission statement. Because startups are very turbulent environments, and I've worked for a few startups, so I know the pain and the joy of it firsthand, to be honest. Like I worked as a engineer for a while with a cybersecurity startup. I worked for a games company for a few years, which was more evolved, actually, to be fair to them. That was a more evolved business. There was still technically a startup. But yeah, basically, if you are a developer who has like mood disorder or any sort of depression or anxiety, just be prepared for that. Almost like pre-plan for that pressure, and be quite set some boundaries in terms of I do need to have a weekend. I can't be fixing like some obscure thing Saturday to Sunday because I want a life, which is a fairly fair boundary to put down. Like, and I think, obviously there is some times where crunch becomes if there's a release coming up or something, but just set those boundaries and don't be aggressive about it. What other types of companies? So one of my best experiences actually with working on IT and development in general was in the charity and third sector, and these are often under-resourced in a lot of ways in terms of IT. So if you really feel passionate about a certain cause, that can be a good way to go. And that's all I can say on that one. And they often have a much better, more understanding HR teams from my own experience, though I did have one very negative experience at a charity, which I can't go into anything really too much, but basically I was open about my bipolarity, and from my perspective I basically got stitched up by HR over a series of weeks, basically. They were very non-understanding. Actually, it was one of my worst experiences, but also one of my best experiences as well. So one of the positive experience I had was very positive. I had a very understanding line manager who worked with me to get the most out of me during the period where I was experienced basically just a bit of a prolonged depression. And the HR team were you know, actually really good. Like they provided support and were willing to just let me have like a week off or something, just to get myself back together enough for rest period to get myself just in a better mental space, right? Which is a great thing. Obviously, like if you're working for someone like a bank or a huge corporate entity or big tech, again, it's huge pressure. So, and you're competing in you. There's a lot more office politics, I imagine. I've never worked for big tech. I never worked for a Facebook or Meta or a Twitter or anything like that. I'm not that interested in that sector, to be honest, personally. Not that they take me. I don't think I'm even like just I don't know. I could go on a whole other video about how the testing process and the sort of screening process is probably getting a bit ridiculous now for these organisations. But whatever. Like I don't want to work for them anyway, to be honest. But basically, in those organisations, obviously you've got, from what I've heard from other people, you're basically working in a silo. So you, in relation to startups, you've got much less responsibility over a big thing, maybe, but you also got less potentially ability to really, decide what you're working on, what stack you can work on. But there's pros and cons to each of those. But anyway, specifically in relation to mental health, I imagine they're probably pretty good, ish. I mean, I'm assuming they have to be. They have to be quite. Nobody, the big tech companies don't want stories in the newspapers about how they're mistreating their employees, and there's a lot of perks to it, so it's probably not that bad. But I can't really speak to that much. In general, I've already talked a lot in the last video about what to do to avoid burnout scenarios. Time off is the main thing. Just when you're not in work, obviously, just don't push yourself too hard on the old. And I'm guilty of this myself. I've done it myself, where I've been working a full-time job or a contract, and I've also been doing other my own side projects on the side. And if you push that to an extreme, which I've done in the past as well, where you're literally doing a full-time job and then coding till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, you can maintain that maybe for a few days or a week. I've even maintained that myself for a month before, but it catches up on you. And I speak from experience here, and pain. It does catch up on you if you push yourself too much to the point where it becomes your coding becomes your absolute obsession, and you become obsessed. It's like coding's a bit like art, right? It's a similar thing, and I'm also very passionate about art and painting and everything. So I sort of know what I'm talking about here. Like, it's an obsession. It's a work of obsession and passion in a way. It's different to art. It's less expressive in some respects. It's more, you're building something from the raw materials that language provides, basically, in a computer. So I almost see coding like a sort of in-between of painting, design, and writing in some abstract way, right? So it's like, because you're creating something visual. There's a visual representation of some data or whatever, but you're also using language to express that that vision or that thing. So I'm going to end this here. I've already talked for like 18 minutes. I'll probably maybe try an expanded video on this. Like I do like to be open about this thing. I believe in authenticity and being just truthful about one's own experience, especially if something is misunderstood as mental health issues and bipolar, whether even schizophrenia or depression or anxiety. I think if more people were, like, everybody goes through some shit, right? Like, everybody goes through some stuff. Some people, it's clinically a part of their mental framework for how they deal with the world, and it's basically the world. How the world responds to that is often just makes these problems worse. So I hope that helps a little bit with, a little bit of a talking honestly about my own experience of trying to negotiate those minefields, if you were. And I can talk in further detail if there's any thirst for that. I don't believe it's that brave for me to be that open about this, but I am open about it. Like, anybody who knows me or knows me well knows that I'm open about my condition, and I I don't see any reason why I should be ashamed of it. And like I said, I've got a bit of a chip on my shoulder about the whole thing. If you've got a problem with me because I have a mental health condition, it's your problem. It's not my problem. Why should I change the way that I can't change it. Like, I literally can't change it. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh yeah, I know. I can go a bit like F society at times if I'm feeling really, especially moody, to be honest. Like, and anger is a component actually of bipolar. So it's more of an anger I found from disappointment at just the human beings, basically. So, but then there's a catastrophizing that occurs within that anger. So it's like, I don't know. I can almost. My mum would always call this like playing the victim. Like she said, one common. Like, I don't know, it's an interesting way to analyze it, right? One. One thing that would commonly come up in our conversations, and your mother's a very important figure in your life, right? Like, is that she said I was playing a victim. When I trying to almost like feeling that the world's against me, or that and like almost like it was a bit morose, and I am a bit morose. I'm a morose person sometimes. I'm probably what the Greeks would call a melancholic in terms of my outlook. I'm a pessimist philosophically and all that sort of thing, right? So I tend to assume the worst and then be surprised if something better happens. The problem with this outlook, of course, is that it means that you just automatically assume the worst. And I guess one thing to say also from this whole mental health conversation is obviously opening up to people in work is a minefield. Like I've done that with varying degrees of success in my past. It really depends on the culture of where you work, to be honest, in truthfulness. Like, if you're around people who are friendly and open-minded and, not focused on this whole, like, idea of everybody has to be perfect. There is a little bit of that in the tech industry. It's sort of like, and I think, actually, the one thing I'll talk for everyone and then I'll end this video because I'm just rambling now. I do think there is an obsession in the tech industry with endless work in the pursuit of greatness. It's like you have to keep on sweating, you have to keep on coding, leak code for 500 hours a bloody month or whatever, like day and night. Just drink all the coffee you can, do all the stimulants you can to get through it. But you know what? Like, I'm speaking from experience here. Like, all of that just leads to burnout. It just leads to you burning out usually, unless you've got the constitution of an ox and the will of I don't know, an ox. I'll end this on a controversial note. Actually, fuck it. So, like, I've had a bit of a I've tried to self-medicate in the past, mostly with coffee, but also a certain herb that can be smoked. Now, I'm like, basically I think that's fine, but if it starts interfering with your work week, like if you work a conventional week, basically, at work, I would caution against smoking during the week. Like, you know what I mean, like the magic. On the weekends, like, knock yourself out, have some fun, like, whatever. But I know, speaking from experience, like, if you've had a hard one at work, and then smoke a doob like 2 or 3 times a week in the evenings, it's alright for a while. You can even get a little bit of creative inspiration from it at times, but again, it's another one of it catches up with you. Like, it does make you like give less of a shit, right? Which is quite good in a lot of ways. Like, you just, things that would otherwise annoy you just don't, which is quite nice. Like, it can make you, but I mean, it affects everyone differently as well. I shouldn't And I'm not, like I said, I'm not advocating for anything. I'm just literally relaying my experiences of a vlog. Anyway, on that bombshell, I'll end this video here. I tried to make this a bit authentic. I tried to make this just like literally me just talking as myself, because that is what a vlog is. Anyway, peace, and keep on fighting the good fight, and keep on coding, keep on deving, keep on doing creative stuff. If anyone has any thoughts below, like, just say if you have any personal experience with mental health, but also being a developer or a designer or anything in that sphere, the tech sphere, then yeah, I mean, what's your experience been? How have you dealt with, negotiating your own mental health in working in IT, basically, or creative programming? Anyway, that's that. In a bit.